So, it's that time of year where Ash Paulson comes out of the Mega Man dungeon. Ash, a new Mega Man game has come out, is coming out, the Mega Man Zero and ZX Legacy Collection, and you have been putting away the hours playing every single game in this collection. And man, how are you feeling about having a new Mega Man collection in 2020?
Well, I'm feeling this is already going to be really weird because already you have said Mega Man ZX, which for me, I say Mega Man ZX, so I don't know what this ZX nonsense is, man. I don't know. You're throwing me for a loop here.
I'm not going to stop.
I love it. No, so it's great. I mean, yeah, here we are with a new Mega Man collection. This is the Mega Man Zero and ZX Legacy Collection, and Capcom very graciously sent me a very early preview code, so I could get plenty of time with all 6 games in the collection, just kind of, get a feel for how they've been, how the emulation is, how they've all been transferred over, and just what the whole, collection experience is like. And so I've been putting quite a few hours into each game, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Sweet. Well, you're a Mega Man mega fan, and I think a lot of people have played the original Mega Man series, a lot of people have played X, but Zero and ZX is something I think is a bit more in like a sub-niche in the Mega Man universe. So I'm going to assume a lot of our viewers probably haven't played these games. So what exactly would you say sets these apart from from Mega Man and Mega Man X?
Well, you'll laugh, but definitely difficulty. I mean, Mega Man games are already known for being pretty hard, at least, for people who are not used to them. But even among Mega Man games, I would say the Zero and ZX, but especially the Zero games, are tough. They're known for being pretty punishing, pretty difficult, but especially as as you get further and further into the series, the games do, find different ways of kind of meeting you halfway, and if you want to knock the difficulty down, you can. Now, of course, I am just talking about playing through them their original versions. This Legacy Collection, you have like a casual, I think it's called casual scenario mode, which makes all the games easier across the board if you just want to enjoy the story, which I think is a great addition. And there's also a save assist mode, which just places checkpoints throughout the levels that you can begin again at if you die, or if you have to, quit the game and you're not at a save point, which I think is a really good concession for the Switch, just because these games, back when they came out, they weren't save anywhere games. You could only save at, specific save points. So I think, especially for 2020, that's a really good quality of life update to just have what is essentially an infinite lives, checkpoint system that'll just get you right back into the action if you just have to turn off the game, or if you don't want to deal with the kind of old school mentality of running out of lives and having to start a stage over. I get that too. These games are really punishing, but they also have great stories mostly, so I can absolutely see why people might just want to knock down the difficulty and enjoy the story for what it is and just kind of roll through the game.
For sure. So just to backpedal a little bit, how many games are we getting in this collection?
So there are 4 Zero games and 2 ZX games. You're getting Mega Man 0, 02, 03, and 04, as well as ZX and ZX Advent. And the former 4 are for Game Boy Advance, and the latter 2 were for the original Nintendo DS. So you're getting 6 full-length games in this collection.
So I guess compared to the Mega Man Legacy Collection and the Mega Man X Collection, these are quite complex compared to those, especially with DS games in there.
Right.
So how do they handle putting a DS game on a TV screen?
Well, it's kind of cool. They actually give you like 7 or 8 different screen, orientations that you can choose from. My favorite is the default one, which is like the first option, which it basically just gives you the top screen for like 3/4 of the TV screen, and then you have the like a piece of wallpaper on the top right to the side right of the screen, and then you have the touch screen at the bottom right of the screen. And what's cool about that, especially in ZX Advent's case, is you use the right analog stick to move the cursor on the touchscreen, and then you press R3 to make selections. So in that way, it actually is a lot more convenient, or at least as convenient as just quickly tapping your thumb on the touchscreen to use the A-Trans move to use different transformations. Basically, in ZX Advent, your main character can transform into pretty much every boss in the game once you've beaten them, and you used to do that by pressing their icon on the touchscreen, but now you just use the right analog stick and press R3, and you get the same effect. It's really cool.
Awesome. I was wondering if these would actually be the definitive versions, considering that the control schemes weren't made for these games, but it sounds like that isn't really an issue with these.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about the controls is, and of course I'm playing on the Switch, I'm playing with a Switch Pro controller most of the time, and the only thing I'd say about the controls is that they make no sense in their default setup when you start each game, especially the Game Boy Advance games. It's less a problem for ZX and ZX Advent, but for all 4 Zero games, you start it up, and immediately the first thing I'm doing is going into the controls menu and like changing my controls, because they just make no sense. If you've played any Mega Man game before in your life, or even really any like run and gun style platformer, you're going to be like, why are these controls like this? I need to change this right now. And but thankfully the controls are super customizable. Really the only complaint I have is that you can't map anything to the ZR or ZL buttons. You have to use the regular L and R buttons, which, not a big deal, but I do wish you could have that option if you want it.
Yeah, it would have been great to use ZR and ZL.
Yeah, ZR, exactly, ZR and ZL. Yeah, like I'm an R dasher. Like I've always used the R button to dash in like the Mega Man X games, and that's the same goes for the Mega Man Zero games. But I've always just felt that the ZL, ZR buttons are more comfortable for me. They're just more natural. So it would be nice if you could use them, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So speaking to the customization, what are the filters like in this version of the game? Because I was watching a trailer, and from what I could see on the YouTube quality, I wasn't too fond of the filters, and I preferred it without a filter. But what are your personal preferences with this?
So basically, there are 2 filters and then no filter. First, you've got your usual Vaseline oily smear filter that just makes everything look really weird and glistening, and like everything's just got like it bathes in oil. It's really weird. I don't like it. Doesn't look good in these games. It usually doesn't look good, period, for retro games, right? But it's weird calling a DS game a retro game, but, there you go. And then the other filter is actually, it's a pretty good CRT filter. I would say, it approximates the kind of that grainy quality of a TV monitor or a computer monitor very well. And if you're into that, if CRT filters are your thing, then I think this is actually one of the better ones you can get in any collection that I've seen. Like any retro collection that I've seen. But as you were saying, at the end of the day, I prefer #no filter. You got to get those big chunky pixels, man. These are Mega Man games, and they're Inti Creates Mega Man games, known for having some of the best pixel animation in the series. I mean, you got to go with the pixel look.
It actually is kind of weird having a CRT filter on these games that were never on CRT TVs, because these were always on flat panels, which is kind of interesting.
Right. Which, yeah, it's super weird. Now, I could be wrong. It may not be it may be a computer monitor filter. I can't remember. It's one or the other. It's either CRT or a computer monitor. But either way, the effect you get from it actually is pretty cool if you're into that.
Right, well, is there anything else special about just the emulation itself or the quality of the entire package?
Definitely. So one of the coolest things is that ZX and ZX Advent had anime cutscenes. They were short, but they were actual anime cutscenes for key story moments. And but they had to be compressed to hell and back, of course, on the DS. So here, Capcom has actually gone to the trouble to give us the fully uncompressed, raw versions of each cutscene, and they look fantastic, man. Like, if you have played these games back on the DS, you are not going to believe how good these cutscenes could have looked. Like, you're going to be like, what was I looking at back then? I thought it looked good then. No, it looks fantastic now. And not only that, but the all 4 Zero games use the DS, the slightly remastered DS versions of the soundtracks that were used for the Mega Man Zero collection on DS. However, this is the first time we've gotten to really hear those on a TV or like with bigger speakers, because any Virtual Console releases there have been use the GBA versions. So it's been really cool, actually, going back through and playing through all 4 Zero games, hearing this higher quality audio, this basically slightly remastered soundtrack coming through my TV or my soundbar. Like, it really does add an extra punch to the soundtrack, especially some of the earlier Zero soundtracks, or I would say Zero 1 soundtrack, which isn't the best in my opinion, but that kind of remastering really helps it.
Alright, so let's slowly go through each game, seeing as you're revisiting the entire series. What's it like going back to the first Mega Man Zero?
I would say Mega Man Zero 1, of all the games in the collection, has probably aged the worst. It's still a good game. Like I'll say this right now, there's not a bad game in this collection. And we'll have to mainly talk about the games themselves, because just for our viewers, our Mega Man fans out there, for this preview, they're actually not letting us talk about any of the collection-specific features, like Z Chaser, the image gallery, the music player. That's all off limits for now, so I can't comment on that. But the games themselves, so Zero 1 has, I would say, aged the worst, but it's still a good game. I just think it's too overly punitive. It can just feel really punishing, and just like the game almost is daring you to fail sometimes, and it's a really hard game. It doesn't really go out of its way to make any concessions for that, and the Cyber Elf system, which is what you use to power up Zero, you can extend his life bar, you can give him various abilities, you can make his attack stronger in various ways, movement speed increased. Like that, it actively works against your rating. So basically, the game is throwing it in your face all the way throughout if you decide to use these Cyber Elves that, okay, yeah, you're making the game easier, but we're going to punish you in terms of your ranking. Thankfully, if you don't care about that, like I don't, then, you can ignore it. But, that is, if you're not a fan of games making you feel kind of sort of bad for, taking the easy route, you might have a problem with Mega Man Zero 1. Thankfully, though, while 0, 2, 3, and 4 are also difficult games, they feel a lot more modern in the sense that, they meet the player where they are and aren't just about being hard.
So a lot of early GBA games have very high saturation to sort of make it easier to view on the original Game Boy Advance. Does every game in this collection avoid that?
That's a good question. I would say definitely that the Zero 1 definitely looks like an older game. You can tell that there is just a general overall quality difference between Zero 1 and the rest of the Zero games, especially starting with Zero 3. Like Zero 2 is kind of in the middle, but then once you get to Zero 3 and beyond, like they feel like completely different looking games. Like obviously they use similar assets, much of the same assets, but the game looks better. And Zero 1 definitely, it feels like looking through a lens into the past. It looks like an older game.
Alright, so what about Zero 2? How big of a jump is that over Zero 1?
It's just a better game all around. Like, they were still ironing out the kinks, but it's just a better game all around, and it's more immediately playable. It feels fairer out of the gate. Zero 2 is really, in my opinion, when the series started to pick up steam. And again, Zero 1's a good game, and it has a phenomenal story. Like, a really good story, as does the whole series. But Zero 2 is when the games started feeling, I think, just a bit more playable right out of the box and a little bit fairer.
With every single game in the collection put together, how many hours do you reckon people are looking at with the Mega Man Zero and ZX collection?
There's a lot of content here, man. I mean, these are all the all four Zero games are basically story-based platformers. They're pretty linear. You can go back and visit areas you've already completed, but basically you are going from story beat to story beat, level to level, boss to boss. But they're longer than you might think, and I would say just for the Zero games alone, you're looking at probably, for your first time, of course, if you don't know what you're doing, 10 plus hours, maybe 8 to 10 for the first game, and then 10 to 12 for the others. It's kind of hard to say because I've played them all so many times by this point, but I would say you're getting, at least a good 30 to 35 hours, maybe even 40 out of the Zero games alone. And then the ZX games, they're exploration-based. Like, they're basically Mega Man Metroidvania-type games where they tried their best to design a Mega Man game around an open, interconnected world to varying degrees of success, but they're also much bigger games. So you could easily get 60 hours out of this whole collection if you really wanted to 100% each game. And I'd say even more, but I hesitate to put too high a number on it because, I have played these games a million times by now, so it's a little hard, my view here is a little skewed.
Alright, so before we get into the specifics of ZX, what would you say that your favourite Zero game is? And also, which would you say is the best one for someone to start with if they don't want to go in for the long hauls? Like just someone who wants to just play one game in the Zero series and then stop there. Which one would you recommend?
Oh, man, I would so not recommend doing that, and I'll tell you why. But first I'll answer your question. And my favorite Zero game is Mega Man Zero 3. And I think most Zero fans are going to tell you that, or most Mega Man fans who play the Zero games will tell you that. It feels like the most well-balanced package. It looks great, it sounds great, it's got a fantastic story that really wraps up all the story beats from the first two games in a really nice way. And it feels like it has a consistently high but fair level of challenge. It's the one Zero game where it feels like they nailed everything just right. And I'd say Zero 4 comes up just behind that. But what I was going to say before is, I mean, if you're going to only play one Zero game, I would play the first one, even if it has aged the least, or aged the not so well, only because these games have really good stories. And I know some people are going to say, you don't play Mega Man games for story, and that's true. Like, I'm a Mega Man fan. I'm a huge Mega Man lore nut, I get it. However, the Zero series is an exception. Like, these games actually do tell a really complete story that technically started in X1, but if it tells a really complete story from Zero 1 all the way through the end of Zero 4 and then beyond in ZX, and I just feel like you're losing a lot of what makes these games special if you ignore the story. So my recommendation would be maybe to play Zero 1 on casual scenario mode, only because the game does feel a bit unfair by today's standards, and if you're gonna knock down the difficulty on any of them, Zero 1 should be the one. And then you get the benefit of experiencing this really great story, and then if you decide you want to play more after that, try Zero 2 on regular mode, and then just go from there. But I really can't overstate just how good the stories in these games are, especially if you're into, Mega Man's world and characters and lore and such, because you really do get a surprisingly full payoff in Mega Man 04 and in Mega Man ZX if you've kind of played everything leading up to that.
I mean, Capcom even recommend using the casual mode for those who want to experience the story, so it definitely seems like they're really trying to push hard how compelling of a story this can be.
It really is. I mean, like I said, it basically, the Zero series takes place, it's not exactly stated, but a couple hundred years after the X series, and it isn't just like cute little nods here and there. Like, they directly reference things that are important to know from the X series, and so it really does. If you are into the lore and you've played all the Legacy collections and you want to see what happens next after X, this is what happens next, and it really does deliver in that sense. So these games to me feel like the complete package because they're not only fantastic platformers to play, they're really great action platformers, but they also tell a great story, which Mega Man doesn't always do. Sometimes us Mega Man fans have to really dig deep and kind of create our own headcanon to fill in certain plot holes because Capcom hasn't always been good about that. But here they went all in on the story, and it shows.
Alright, before we talk about a bit more about ZX, is there anything you want to say about Zero 4 before we move on?
Zero 4, I would say, it continued to innovate, even when the series felt like maybe it had reached its peak. I don't know if the full package is quite as great as Zero 3, but it's still really good, and it introduced this new weapon called the Zero Knuckle, which literally just lets Zero, rip weapons off of enemies. It's super cool looking, it's really satisfying, and, basically, anything that he lands the last hit on with the Zero Knuckle, he just rips it apart and takes whatever gun or shield or blade weapon it had, and he can use it for a limited number of uses himself before chucking it away and then grabbing another weapon. So Zero 4, despite coming after what I think is the best in the series for the Zero series, found ways to innovate and keep making it relevant. There's a whole weather system that can power up or power down bosses depending on what you feel like doing at the time, and if you fight them in their powered up state, you get their EX moves when you beat them. There's a lot to these games, and more than there's a whole crafting system. You can craft parts. I'm not saying it's all the best in class of what it is, but all these games are pretty much really great across the board, and even Zero 1, while it hasn't aged particularly well, it's still a good game.
Oh, awesome. So let's go on to Mega Man ZX. and,
nice.
I almost said ZX then. ZX is basically a Mega Man Metroidvania, so how on earth does that work?
It works. I mean, it is their idea of taking Mega Man and designing a game around a huge interconnected world that is, linked by doors and such. And the problem with that is that the map is kind of useless, especially in the first ZX. The map just isn't very good, and the way these areas are linked don't necessarily make sense. It makes, there's video game logic to it. Like, you can be in a forest in one area, then you go into a door and suddenly you're in an amusement park or an Arctic wonderland. And so there's video game logic there where, you're going from area B to area D, and the theme changes, the background's different, the music's different, you're in a different area, but when you need to go back there, it's harder to remember how to get to where you need to go because there isn't really any rhyme or reason to the way the world is put together, it feels. So, as much as I like the idea of having a Metroid-esque Mega Man game where you have this big interconnected world, I don't think ZX and ZX Advent's implementation of that was necessarily the best. That said, it makes up for that with just great gameplay again. Like, again, these are Inti Creates Mega Man games at their very best. And it's just running and dashing and shooting and jumping around the various levels, especially once you unlock different biometal forms. It's just a blast to play. It feels great. But yes, the world design and layout can be very frustrating in those games.
Well, I guess the experimental elements are quite interesting, though, because there are over 25 Mega Man games you can play on the Switch right now. So for two of them to just be completely different genres that's kind of appealing, I feel.
I think so too. I mean, again, I can't, I am playing through all the games again to kind of render my final verdict on them for the review, and it has been longer since I played the ZX games than I have the Zero games, so I'm kind of rediscovering those, as I play through these in the collection. But I do think that so far, what you're getting here, in this collection, the 6 games, like you said, you're getting 4 very straight, story-based action 2D action platformers that are just some of the best in their class. And then you have these slightly more experimental, kind of weirder ZX games that are also really fun to play, but maybe the stuff around it isn't quite as sharp because they were experimenting at the time as well. So, but either way, I do think that what you seem to be, getting in this collection is an incredible value. But of course, I can't talk about all the other stuff that you get along with that, too. I can really only talk about the games themselves.
I think the most interesting thing about this collection is it's just giving people a bunch of games that they may not have played before. Whereas the original Legacy Collection and the X Collection, I think a lot of people have played those games. So for a lot of people, this is going to be entirely new stuff, which, that's just fascinating in and of itself. And it seems that these are some of the more experimental sort of core Mega Man games.
Yeah, I would say 0-1 was experimental, but I think once they established that formula in 0-1 and to a lesser degree 0-2, you kind of get the Zero formula that doesn't feel quite as experimental. But ZX never quite gets out of that experimental vibe. At least, again, it's been a while since I played them, but from what I've, replayed of ZX and ZX Advent so far, I still get that kind of slightly off-kilter, weird vibe to it, especially with ZX Advent, because ZX Advent, it does some weird things with the overall Mega Man story that I can't say I'm a huge fan of, but I'm trying to come back into it with a fresh eye and see how I feel. But it also has full voice acting, which is kind of a first for a handheld Mega Man game at the time too, and even I think still is now. The thing about that voice acting is it's absolutely atrocious. It is. ZX Advent's English voice acting is a special kind of bad, but it can also be enjoyable in that badness too. I mean, any Mega Man fans out there who have played the game will know that one of the 2 playable characters, Ash, she is a bounty hunter, and she is all about that booty. And it sounds like I'm being inappropriate here. I'm not. Her script is all about her coming face to face with her booty and chasing down her booty and booty this and booty that, and it does make for some real laugh out loud moments that, despite the poor quality of the voice acting, it does make it fun. And I have to say, that does benefit from the fact that the voice acting has been remastered. So they're actually using mastered audio now. You can choose the original compressed audio if you want, but I don't know why you'd ever do that because the mastered audio sounds so crisp. And I was listening to it, I'm like, wait a minute, this did not sound anywhere close to this good back on the DS. And I looked up some videos, and no, it didn't. It was so garbled and grainy, and I have to say, like, the effort they have put into remastering both the voice acting and the giving us the fully uncompressed cutscenes in the ZX games, really, it makes this collection feel, at least so far, like they just put they went that little extra distance even above and beyond the classic and X collections, which are great in their own right. Now, but of course, I haven't finished all the games. I don't know if there are any late game bugs or anything. I would be surprised if that happened. But, I haven't finished all the games, clearly. This is a preview, so I can't be sure. And
they of course delayed this collection as well, so if there were bugs, they've probably ironed them out by now. But yeah, it sounds like a fascinating collection, and they've really gone above and beyond to remaster even the more
well, yeah, like they put in effort to remaster elements that I don't think people necessarily would have been that upset if they didn't. There certainly would have been people who would have been like, oh, well, why couldn't they give us the uncompressed anime cutscenes? But I don't think it would have been a deal breaker for people if they didn't. But they did, and I think that just puts a little bit more of a finer sheen on this collection than perhaps we saw in the previous Legacy collections. But again, there wasn't necessarily as much to remaster in those either, depending on how you look at it. So either way, it just seems like what they've done here, they put together a collection that is not only, trying to appeal to Mega Man fans, but really get people to understand why these games are so good and present them in the best possible light. And they also, like the previous Legacy collections, they also include multiple localizations of every game in the series. So you've got like the English and Japanese versions for every Zero game, and then you've also got the English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Japanese versions for the ZX games. And those, or at least the Japanese versions, actually maintain the differences from their Western versions. So like, you can play ZX Advent if you can deal with reading Japanese text. You can play ZX Advent with the far better Japanese voice track if you want. And same thing with the Zero games. If you know your way through them, you can play them with the blood spurts restored to their former glory. That was one thing they took out of the Western Zero games, is that when Zero would slice any enemy with a Z-Saber, a little blood spurt would come out, which kind of speaks to just how much darker these games are in general. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the increased focus on storytelling, like I mentioned earlier. But it is really cool that they kind of included those extra little things for longtime fans who, may or may not have cared about it, but it's there just in case you want it, and I think that's really cool.
It sounds very hard to fault these games. Like, anything I could think of that they don't have, it seems they do have. So,
I mean, that's the thing, is like, I was playing Zero 1, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel, I will say, maybe all the Zero games feel very frustrating sometimes, because, they are those old school 2D hard Mega Man games where, even for someone like me, who has basically mastered the classic and X games to a degree, I have a hard time with a lot of these games because Zero is a short-range fighter. He has a buster, but he uses a Z-Saber, so it's a completely different style of gameplay. And I found myself getting frustrated, like, oh man, I don't want to redo this stage. But the beauty of it is that you've got those quality of life updates with the save assist mode and the casual scenario mode. So as long as you don't have an ego about it, go make the games easier and enjoy them however you want. And I think that's one of the coolest things that any collection of older games can do, is kind of present them in a new, more convenient light for a contemporary audience.
That sounds absolutely awesome, Ash. Before we wrap up though, is there another Legacy collection that you want to see after the Zero and ZX collection?
Well, I mean, we're already this far. I want them all. I mean, of course, let's get Mega Man Legends Legacy Collection. Let's get Battle Network and Star Force Legacy Collection. I mean, why stop now, right? And I feel like, I don't know if Legends will happen. I think that would be really cool, but I feel like there are a lot of hurdles to that. But I kind of feel like Battle Network and Star Force might be next in line. I would be, for as enormously successful as those games were, mainly Battle Network, I'd be really surprised if they didn't want to, bring them out for a new audience on Switch. And of course, I hate to use this, perfect for Switch, but it's kind of perfect for Switch. They're handheld RPGs. Yeah. So yeah, I hope it happens.
I'm picturing Legends 1, Legends 2, Tron Bonne, and the unreleased Legends 3 prototype, which I think they had finished and ready to release and just cancelled, so that's somewhere in Capcom HQ.
just give, let's do that, and then if it sells well, let's just get Legends 3. Let's just, not that I ever actually expect that, but, if they keep going in the direction they seem to be going with the Zero and ZX collection, I think they could do something really special with future collections. So, like I said, this is a preview. I haven't played through all the games to completion in this collection, but all the stuff they've added, alongside these already great games to make them more palatable for people who maybe don't want to become like a super hardcore 2D Mega Man player, I think is great. And so far, so good.
Sweet. Well, this sounds like another great collection, and it's out in a couple of weeks' time now. And until then, thank you so much for watching, and of course be sure to subscribe to Game Explain for a lot more on the Mega Man Zero and ZX collection and other things gaming too. Until next time, bye!